Hey guys, it's Miss Michael again. We're on our third lesson on oceans. Today's lesson is on the ocean environment. We have talked about ocean landforms and ocean motion. All right, our ocean landforms are what? What are the four? Continental shelf, continental slope, continental rise, abyssal plain. Yeehaw! Now, we also then talked about ocean motion. We have three types of movement in the ocean, which are very important. We had that of waves caused by WWW, wind, water, waves. Then we have tides caused by that moon bulging the land and running the water out of its space and onto the surface. And then we have that of currents, currents caused by temperature, that of wind, and that of salinity. Make sure you keep your brain a juicy goosey. Love you guys. All right, on to this lesson. Today's lesson is on ocean environment. Now, when we talk about the ocean environment, the plants and animals living on the Earth's ocean is affected by the physical characteristics of the ocean environment. Now, what do you mean by physical characteristics, you say? Well, physical characteristics mean the depth, how deep it is, the temperature of it, and salinity. All of those are going to affect the habitat of these organisms and where they live. So, what affects where an animal or plant lives? The depth of the ocean, the temperature of the ocean, and the salinity of the ocean. Now, if you look here, this is a diagram that shows the different levels of our environments. We have known as the sunlight zone. I bet you didn't know what that is. I bet that's the zone that mainly has sunlight. It's the shallow part of the ocean. And that is where our most abundant part of our animals live because that's where the plants grow. Now we have known as what is the twilight zone. It's not dark, but it's not light either. So with twilight, it's kind of like when the sun is kind of going to bed at night or the sun's coming up. It's not real dark, but it's not real light. Then we have the dark, deep zone. And that is the zone of the deepest. That's where there's very little light that happens. We also have known as the abyss. The abyss is also the part of the abyssal plain. That is the deepest part, where there is absolutely no light. And these organisms have had to adapt to living without light and very little water. With very little food. They've adapted to other types of organisms to eat. Now, the depths. As you travel below the ocean surface, visibility gets decreased. Now, visibility means how you can vision, how you can see. So the ability to see decreases. Decrease was another word I noticed on some of your words in the past. Decrease means to get smaller or to get less. So the visibility gets less or gets smaller in the ability to see. The sunlight can only penetrate water as deep as 3,000 feet or 900 meters. That's not very deep. If you think about our deepest part of the ocean is 36,000 feet. Think about that. That's not very deep in the ocean. Because of this, many of the animals live at the upper zone of the ocean where there's plenty of sunlight. Plant life, known as phytoplankton, and if you remember, that kind of looks like the word photosynthesis, is even more dependent on the penetration of sunlight because of photosynthesis, because plants need sunlight in order to make their food. Because of this, the ocean plants need to live much closer to the surface, about 328 feet to 100 meters, in order for them to carry light out for life processes of photosynthesis. But what is photosynthesis? Going back to fourth grade, when we talked about photosynthesis with either Miss Ellis or myself, photosynthesis is the process where plants make their own food using carbon dioxide, what you breathe out, and the sunlight, and of course gives us oxygen. But in that process, they're making food, glucose, sugar for the plants so that they can eat themselves because they make their own food, known as producers. So the producers in the ocean are known as phytoplankton because they make their own food using the process of photosynthesis. So phytoplankton looks kind of like photosynthesis. So therefore, look at the words, how similar. So phytoplankton are our plants in the ocean, and they make most of the oxygen on Earth. Ocean depth. This allows producers that use photosynthesis to grow here. The kelp, the seaweed, the algae. Most of the living things in the ocean live at the very beginning or top of the ocean surface, known as the sunlight zone. The ocean depth. Lots of animals live in this zone because there's plenty of food for them to live. If you're an organism, you're going to eat on that of phytoplankton, then you're going to live up there where phytoplankton. If you then eat on that organism that eats on phytoplankton, then you're going to live where that organism lives. So there's a lot of organisms that live at the sunlight zone because they need food in order to live. Go deeper into the ocean, below 3,000 feet, and it's pitch black, dark, cold. As you go deeper into the ocean, the temperature decreases. It becomes colder the farther you get because there's no sunlight warming the water. And then the water pressure increases, getting heavier on us. What does that mean? So, if it's getting colder and water pressure, these organisms have got to be able to adapt to that. Water pressure increases due to the weight of the Earth's gravitational pull on top of those ocean water. Now, if you look at this diagram, the diagram shows you up here at the top of the ocean, about 300 meters, the warm water is warmer, fresher, and oxygen rich. As you go deeper into it, the dark, deeper waters have no photosynthesis because there is no light for the plants to make photosynthesis. It gets colder, saltier, and the oxygen gets less. And as you continue to go deeper, we have carbonated compensation depths, and the carbon calcium starts to form here. Ocean depth. Very few organisms, plants or animals, can live in the conditions below that of 300 meters. No plants will be found on these depths, but creatures that do are very strange looking animals and have adapted to living into these colder temperatures and more pressure on them. The blobfish and the anglerfish. The anglerfish is one that makes their own bioluminescent light, where they produce their own light through chemicals so that they can see. Ocean temperature near the equator. The waters on Earth of ocean can reach the temperature of a warm bath. Many forms of sea life in the warmer ocean water includes that of coral reefs, manatees, and rays. These organisms like warmer temperatures, and so therefore they're going to be in the warmer areas near the equator. Ocean temperatures. In the polar regions, many of these animals have natural antifreeze in their blood. In the Arctic region, survive by relying on thick layers of fatty blubber and fur to keep them warm, like walruses and whales. What is salinity? We talked about it in the last lesson. Salinity is the amount of salt in the ocean. What affects the salinity or the salt in the ocean? Rainfall causes the decrease in salt level. All right, so rainfall causes the decrease in salt water. Why? Because the water becomes diluted, less salt in the water. It's like putting too much water in your Kool-Aid and it tastes weak. That's what diluted means. It gets less salt in the water. Evaporation causes a increase of salt levels, meaning that if I let the water evaporate out of the water, it will leave the salt behind. So if you want to try an experiment at home, go get a little bit of water, put a lot of salt in your water, a lot, and let it sit on your kitchen cabinet. See what happens. That's the same thing that's happening here because the water becomes more saturated, meaning more salt becomes in the water. Runoff from rivers cause the decrease of salt level. Why? Because again, it becomes diluted, less salt in the water, meaning that it weakens as the rivers, like the Shenandoah River, dumping into the Chesapeake Bay. Now you're putting more water into the salt. It was fresh water into salt water. Here's a video on ocean salinity that I will have linked onto Schoology.
Several natural
Salinity, animals that live in the salty water have developed ways to deal with these salty environments. Most marine creatures keep the salinity inside their body, equaling to the salinity of their surrounding waters. So their salinity, meaning the salt level in their body, is the same level as that of the ocean water. And we do the same thing. We have salt in our body, if you didn't realize that, even by eating salt, but also you have salt in your body as well. If they are moved to waters of higher or lower salinity, they eventually die because they have not been able to adapt to it. If you go back and think about fourth grade science, animals have to be able to adapt to the environment they're living in. And so if they are not able to adapt to this amount of salt in the water, then they will die. And most organisms are not able to keep changing back and forth between salinities, between the amount of salt. So therefore, they have to be keeping their body salt level inside their body at the same level as the salt of the ocean. It's an adaptation. Is this an adaptation? Yes, it is, because they're adapting, they're changing their body in order to survive. If not, they will die. If you remember, change or die. And that's how organisms have to survive. Now, that's the last of this lesson. Please make sure you review over this information.